The days of building ourselves out of this problem, I think, are pretty much over.
The cities now have to scramble with whatever is left over.
Beyond 15, 20 years, it gets pretty bad pretty quickly.
All of the water in the rivers is now owned by somebody. There is no water effectively out there for any newcomers.
You take the water out of the river, you're basically going to devastate it and destroy the ecosystem.
There's not much lag between demand and supply.
I really think we're at a key point in history because we can see that there will be a water shortage.
At some point we're going to come to a crossroads where we can't do everything that we want.
If nothing is done, then the risk of shortage escalates quite dramatically. And we know what's going to happen.
There's a water supply problem in Colorado.
Growth finally caught up to the developed water supplies.
The population is projected to increase by 3-4 times at least.
By the year 2050, the population of Colorado is supposed to double from 5 million to 10 million.
There is a very large additional demand for water, and it's water that isn't there at the moment.
The problem exists. The difference between the supply and the demand exists.
Essentially all the water that Mother Nature provides has been appropriated already.
This water need is not front and center in Colorado.
People think of water, it's nice to have lakes that don't fluctuate and rivers that gurgle. Is that going to go away when we have 10 million people?
It's tough to change policies, at least in the water sector. If we are not starting that conversation right now, in this next 10 to 15 years, that might be too little too late going forward.
They're asking, do you have the water issue fixed? If you don't, they'll probably go somewhere else.
3 things can happen, 2 are in place, and that's conservation and reusing water. The third one is basically the conversion of water rights from one sector to the next.
When you get into these sustained droughts year after year after year, you have to have additional water available to you.
Water conservation is changing the way we do things, changing the amount of lawn that we water, changing how long we take showers, shutting the water off when you're shaving. Those are all forms of conservation.
Some people look at conservation from the municipal standpoint that if we can just conserve with low flow toilets or new fixtures within a house, then we can meet some of the needs that way. And that's true, you can meet some needs that way.
I really define conservation in 2 ways. And the first would be to use less water per person. The second way that I define conservation is conserving and capturing and storing water in this state.
We've seen considerable conservation. Major water utilities have come up with significant water savings.
As citizens, we can all work to conserve and to reduce the amount of water that we're using, which has the benefit to the municipalities that are supplying us with water.
In the long run, we will still need to provide additional sources of water.
We can't conserve our way out of the problem. We have a discrepancy between our supply and demand, and the solution is not simply to use water more efficiently.
Conservation is not going to be the ultimate answer.
Conservation's helping, but it's not the answer.
Another source is reuse. Many people view this as the ultimate conservation.
Water reuse is using the water 2 or 3 different times.
What we do at that treatment plant is we chemically adjust the water, oxidize it, run it through an ultraviolet system. It is filtered, it's run through carbon, it's disinfected, and then is put back into the drinking water system. We will be able to make crystal clear water out of even water that you might turn your nose up at the moment.
The discharge parameters require that water to be near drinking water quality. So in terms of health, there is not a concern.
But as you reuse water, that historically came down to irrigated agriculture, you're affecting downstream users as well. So you just have to keep that in mind.
Water reuse and potential negative aspects is the cost of it. It's usually a reverse osmosis process, which is very energy intensive and very expensive, and it creates a byproduct that then you have to dispose of.
So those are some of the hidden costs to the public. The amount of energy and the cost is going to be enormous. The studies show that you cannot catch up. You will have to take measures that are absolutely unthinkable.
Even with reusing 100% and even with conserving the most you can conserve, it's still not going to solve the problem.
And I think you're going to see some amount of agricultural water that will be transferred over for use in the cities. The nature of agricultural water along the Front Range is probably going to change.
There can be some solutions that work for both municipalities and farmers out on the plains.
We're trying to farm agriculture ways in a desert that uses a tremendous amount of water. Roughly 80 to 85% of river water is actually used in the agriculture arena. There are different ways to farm and more efficient ways, growing in greenhouses, growing with drip systems. There's ways to conserve with farming.
That is something you can't tell people, stop growing alfalfa with this water. When they have the right to the water, they can do whatever they want.
In terms of ag water, it brings with it its own issues.
Some municipalities have gone down, bought up a lot of water rights, and really the towns have dried up. If we look at it together, we can really come up with a win-win situation for both the environment and for municipalities and for irrigated agriculture.
In the future, people are going to have to work out what the balance is between cities and farms and environment, cost of water, the social amenity of water.
People turn the faucet on and the water comes out, and it's very inexpensive. Someday that's going to change. Either that turn the faucet on, the water doesn't come out, or you're paying ridiculous amounts of money for that water, and people will start caring at that point.
You end up in a situation where you just do not have enough water to go around, which means you will have to choose between priorities.
I really think we should be acting now.
We need major projects and ways to bring more water to the areas of high demand.
The future is really difficult to know because there are so many environmental hurdles, so many regulations. Water projects have taken anywhere between 20 and 30 years. We only have 40 years until 2050.
What we can do as a public right now, our policymakers, politicians, is to have that conversation, what kind of growth we would like to see.
In the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, there's going to be a lot more dialogue.
But the good news is we have time, and the conversation should start right now.
We need to look at what kind of projects can benefit all of the citizens of Colorado. And water has and will continue to be our most precious resource. So whether you raise cattle, or you kayak, or you fish, or you cook or clean, or just water your lawn, or whether you just like to look at the beauty that water creates when it touches land or plants or animals, the water of Colorado affects you, and it makes us all connected.